Jake Morrison had been floating in the cold darkness of space for 3 days when the alien ship found him. His escape pod was barely working and the air was getting thin. He could see the broken pieces of his ship Aurora scattered around him like metal snow against the stars. The gravity storm had hit without warning and torn his exploration vessel apart in seconds. He was the only one who made it to an escape pod. The alien ship looked like nothing Jake had ever seen. It was smooth and curved like a bird with wings that seemed to shimmer in the starlight. Strange symbols glowed along its hull in colors that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Jake tried to signal with his emergency beacon, but he was not sure if they would understand or even care about one human floating in the void. Inside the alien ship, Captain Veltar studied the strange object on his screens. His feathers ruffled with uncertainty as he spoke to his crew in their musical language. The creature in the metal pod was unlike anything in their databases. It walked on 2 legs like a Zephyrian but had no feathers, and its skin was pale and smooth. Some of his crew wanted to leave it behind. Unknown species could be dangerous and they had their own mission to complete. But Veltar remembered the old stories his grandmother used to tell about showing kindness to strangers. Every species in the galaxy had such stories, and they usually ended well for those who chose to help. He gave the order to bring the pod aboard their ship. His medical officer Kreelan protested that they knew nothing about this creature's biology, but Veltar had made his choice. Jake felt the gentle pull as the tractor beam caught his pod. The alien ship was much larger up close with docking bays that could hold dozens of smaller vessels. As his pod was pulled inside, Jake tried not to panic. These beings had saved his life, but he had no idea what they planned to do with him next. The docking bay filled with breathable atmosphere, and Jake could hear sounds outside his pod. Voices that sounded like singing mixed with mechanical noises he could not identify. When the pod door finally opened, Jake found himself face to face with beings that looked like large birds that walked upright. Their feathers were blue and green, and their eyes were larger than human eyes. One of them stepped forward and spoke in a language that sounded like music. Jake held up his hands to show he meant no harm. The bird creatures seemed to understand this gesture because they did the same thing with their wing arms. The one who seemed to be their leader pointed to himself and said something that sounded like Veltar. Jake pointed to himself and said, "Jake," very slowly. Over the following days, Jake learned that he was aboard a Zephyrian vessel called the Wind Caller. The crew was curious about him and spent hours trying to communicate. They showed him pictures and objects while speaking their words. Jake did the same with his limited supplies from the escape pod. Slowly they began to understand each other. Veltar was fascinated by this strange creature who called himself Jake. The human learned their language faster than should have been possible and asked questions about everything. Jake wanted to know about their technology, their culture, and their world. In return, he told them about Earth and humanity as best he could with his growing vocabulary. The ship's doctor, Kreelan, was amazed by Jake's biology. Humans were similar to Zephyrians in many ways, but also very different. They had no feathers or wings, but their hands could grip things in ways Zephyrian claws could not. Their minds worked differently, too. Where Zephyrians thought in groups and harmony, humans seemed to think as individuals first. Jake learned about the greater galaxy during his time aboard the Wind Caller. Hundreds of intelligent species lived among the stars in a loose alliance they called the Confederation. They traded with each other and shared knowledge, but mostly kept to their own worlds. This was because of the Devourers. The Devourers were machines that ate entire planets. They had been destroying worlds for thousands of years, and no one knew how to stop them. The best the Confederation could do was hide and hope the Devourers would not find them. Whole civilizations lived in fear of the metal, ships that came from the dark between stars. Jake was shocked to learn that Earth had never been contacted because it was hidden in a region of space filled with young stars and dangerous radiation. The Devourers avoided such areas because the energy storms could damage their systems. Humanity had developed alone while the rest of the galaxy cowered in fear. As the weeks passed, Jake became part of the Wind Caller's crew. He helped where he could and shared human knowledge about engineering and tactics. The Zephyrians were amazed by some of the simple solutions humans used for complex problems. They had never thought to approach difficulties the way Jake's species did. When the Wind Caller finally reached Zephyrian space, Jake knew his life had changed forever. Captain Veltar offered to take him to Earth, but Jake wanted to learn more about the galaxy first. He spent 6 months on the Zephyrian homeworld of Ethros learning about other species and the threat that hung over them all. The Zephyrians treated Jake like family. They gave him a place to live and included him in their daily lives. Jake learned their customs and made friends among the people who had saved him. But he also learned about the attacks that came without warning and the worlds that had been consumed by the Devourers. When Jake finally asked to be taken home, he carried with him not just gratitude, but knowledge. He had learned that the galaxy was full of good people who lived in constant fear. He had learned that sometimes one act of kindness could change everything. Captain Veltar's decision to save one human was about to change the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The transport ship that carried Jake back to Earth was filled with gifts from his Zephyrian friends and complete records of everything they knew about the Confederation and the Devourers. Jake stared out at the stars during the long journey home and wondered what humanity would do when they learned they were not alone. Jake Morrison stood before the emergency assembly of Earth's Global Defense Council 3 days after his return. The room was packed with leaders from every nation and representatives from major military organizations. Admiral Lisa Parker led the session while Jake prepared to share what he had learned during his time with the Zephyrians. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some officials demanded proof that Jake was telling the truth about alien civilizations. Others wanted to know why these beings had never contacted Earth before. Jake explained about the stellar nursery that hid their solar system and the radiation that kept the Devourers away. He showed them the gifts from his Zephyrian friends and played recordings of their language. Dr. Kevin Walsh was the first military leader to grasp the full meaning of what Jake was telling them. While other officials argued about the reality of alien contact, Kevin was already thinking about the strategic implications. Earth had developed in isolation while hundreds of other worlds lived in terror. Humanity had created weapons and tactics that no one else had ever seen. The debate went on for hours, but Admiral Parker finally called for order. She asked Jake to explain exactly what the Devourers were and what they wanted. Jake described the mechanical ships that consumed entire planets for resources. He told them about civilizations that had been wiped out overnight and worlds reduced to empty rock floating in space. The room fell silent when Jake finished speaking. The officials looked at each other with growing understanding. Earth was safe for now, but their new friends in the galaxy were dying. The Zephyrians had saved one human, and now that human was asking his entire species to return the favor on a scale no one had ever imagined. Kevin Walsh was the first to speak after the silence. He stood and addressed the assembly with the calm voice of a career military strategist. The doctor explained that humanity had advantages no other species possessed. They had developed military technology in isolation, and their tactics were completely unknown to the Devourers. Lisa Parker agreed with Kevin's assessment. She pointed out that humans had spent their entire history fighting wars against other humans who could think and adapt. Every other species in the galaxy seemed to fight the same way they had fought for thousands of years. Humans changed their tactics constantly and never stopped looking for new ways to win. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Some officials wanted to hide Earth's location and avoid getting involved in galactic conflicts. Others argued that humanity had a moral duty to help the species that had shown them kindness. The military leaders were split between those who saw opportunity and those who feared disaster. Jake spoke again on the 3rd day. He told them about Captain Veltar's decision to save a stranger whose species he had never seen before. He described the kindness of the Zephyrian people and the fear they lived with every day. He reminded the assembly that the Devourers would eventually find Earth no matter how well hidden it was. The vote was close, but the decision was made. Earth would mobilize every resource it had to build a fleet capable of fighting the Devourers. The project was named Operation Exodus, and it would be the largest undertaking in human history. Every nation would contribute materials, scientists, and personnel to the effort. The industrial transformation began immediately. Factories that had made cars started making spaceship parts. Scientists who had studied ocean currents began working on faster-than-light travel. Military experts who had planned ground battles started learning about combat in 3-dimensional space with no gravity. Kevin Walsh became the director of military strategy for Operation Exodus. He assembled teams of experts from every branch of the armed forces and asked them to forget everything they knew about conventional warfare. Fighting in space against mechanical enemies would require completely new approaches to tactics and strategy. The first human warship began construction 6 months after Jake's return. It was built in orbit around Earth, using materials from asteroid mining operations that had been expanded beyond anything previously imagined. The ship was designed around human strengths like adaptability and individual initiative. Jake worked with the engineering teams to incorporate Zephyrian technology into human designs. The aliens had given him detailed technical specifications as gifts, but human engineers found ways to improve on the original designs. They added armor that could change configuration during battle and weapons that could be modified on the fly. The ship was named U.S. Defiance, and it represented everything humanity could do when they worked together toward a common goal. Captain Ryan Torres was chosen to command the vessel. After extensive testing showed he could adapt to new situations faster than any other candidate. He had been a test pilot before the alien contact and understood both human psychology and cutting-edge technology. Training programs began for crew members who would serve aboard the new ships. Humans had to learn how to live and work in zero gravity for months at a time. They had to master weapons that could destroy targets from millions of miles away. Most importantly, they had to learn how to work with alien species who might join them in battle. The Zephyrians sent technical advisors to help with the construction and training. These alien engineers were amazed by human innovation and the speed at which Earth's population adapted to new challenges. They had expected the humans to copy existing Confederation technology, but instead, humans kept improving on everything they were shown. Admiral Parker oversaw the entire operation from a command center built specifically for coordinating the massive project. She received daily reports from construction sites on 6 different planets and training facilities throughout the solar system. The scale of Operation Exodus was beyond anything humans had attempted before. The first test flights of the Defiance exceeded all expectations. Captain Torres reported that the ship handled better than anything he had ever piloted, and the weapon systems were more accurate than computer simulations had predicted. The crew worked together with an efficiency that impressed even experienced Zephyrian observers. 18 months after Jake Morrison's return to Earth, the UES Defiance was ready for its first mission. The ship carried a crew of 200 humans and enough firepower to level a small city. More importantly, it carried the hopes of an entire species that had decided to repay a debt of kindness with interest. Jake stood in the observation deck as Earth fell away behind them. Captain Veltar's simple decision to save a stranger had started a chain of events that would reshape the galaxy. Humanity was no longer alone, and they were no longer hiding. They were going to war against an enemy that had never faced anything like them before. The UES Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Ethros system to find a battle already in progress. 3 massive Devourer harvester ships were systematically destroying the outer defense platforms, while smaller Zephyrian vessels tried desperately to slow their advance. Captain Ryan Torres had never seen anything like the mechanical monsters that were tearing through the defenses. Each Devourer ship was the size of a small city with weapons that could punch holes through asteroid-sized objects. They moved with mechanical precision and seemed to ignore the desperate attacks from the defending Zephyrian fleet. Jake Morrison stood beside Captain Torres on the bridge and felt his heart sink as he watched the overwhelming firepower of humanity's new enemy. The Zephyrian defenders were fighting bravely, but their weapons barely scratched the hull of the nearest Devourer ship. Their tactics followed patterns that had been used for centuries in space combat. They formed neat formations and fired in coordinated volleys just as their ancestors had done in countless previous battles against pirates and raiders. Captain Torres studied the enemy ships for several minutes before making his decision. The Devourers were powerful, but they moved in straight lines and their weapons fired at predictable intervals. They were machines following programs that had probably not been updated in thousands of years. Human tactics would be completely unknown to them. The Defiance accelerated toward the nearest Devourer ship at an angle no Zephyrian pilot would ever consider. Instead of approaching from the front where the heaviest weapons were located, Torres brought his ship in from below, where the Harvester's sensors seemed to have blind spots. He ordered his weapons officer to target what looked like sensor arrays rather than the heavily armored main hull. The first human weapons to be fired in galactic warfare were not the massive energy cannons that every other species used. Torres ordered the launch of modified nuclear missiles that had been redesigned to work in the vacuum of space. The Devourers had shields that could stop energy weapons, but they had never encountered kinetic projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The explosion that followed lit up the entire system. The nuclear warheads detonated inside the Devourer's shield perimeter and sent shockwaves through the mechanical ship's hull. For the first time in living memory, a Devourer ship staggered under enemy fire and actually changed course to avoid further damage. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake watched from her position in the weapons control center as the Devourer ship tried to respond to this new threat. The machine intelligence controlling the vessel had no experience with enemies that attacked from unexpected angles using weapons it did not recognize. Its response was slow and predictable. The Zephyrian defenders could not believe what they were seeing. The impossible had happened, and a Devourer ship was actually damaged by enemy fire. Captain Veltar immediately contacted the human vessel and offered to coordinate their attacks. He had commanded defense fleets for 20 years, but had never seen anything like the tactics the humans were using. Captain Torres accepted the offer of coordination, but explained that human tactics required flexibility that might be difficult for Zephyrian pilots to match. Instead of trying to integrate their forces, he suggested that the Zephyrians continue their traditional attacks to keep the other Devourer ships busy while the Defiance concentrated on one target at a time. The second attack run proved even more effective than the first. Torres brought his ship around the damaged Devourer at high speed while launching smaller missiles that released clouds of metallic chaff. The primitive electronic warfare technique confused the mechanical ships' targeting systems and allowed the Defiance to get close enough to use its energy weapons at point-blank range. Sarah Blake coordinated the close-range attack with precision that impressed even her own crew. Human weapons were designed to be modified during combat, and she adjusted power levels and targeting parameters in real time as the battle developed. The concentrated fire punched through the Devourer's armor and started secondary explosions deep inside the mechanical ship. The other two Devourer ships finally recognized that they faced a new type of enemy and began changing their tactics. But their mechanical minds could only process information so quickly and adapt within the limits of their programming. They started moving in more complex patterns, but they were still predictable to human observers who had spent centuries fighting thinking enemies. Jake Morrison found himself assigned to the tactical analysis station, where he used his knowledge of Devourer capabilities to predict their next moves. He had learned during his time with the Zephyrians that the mechanical ships always followed logical patterns when deciding how to respond to threats. Human unpredictability was something they could not easily counter. The battle that followed lasted for 6 hours and marked the first major defeat of Devourer forces in over 2 centuries. The Defiance used hit-and-run tactics that no other species had ever attempted in space combat. Captain Torres would accelerate toward an enemy ship at full speed, then reverse thrust at the last moment while launching missiles in directions that seemed random but were actually calculated to exploit blind spots in the enemy's defenses. Lieutenant Commander Blake led the first human boarding action. When the damaged Devourer ship's defenses finally collapsed, her team used equipment designed for urban warfare on Earth, adapted for zero-gravity combat. They moved through the mechanical corridors, using techniques that had been developed fighting human enemies in Earth's cities. The interior of the Devourer ship was a nightmare of mechanical systems and automated defenses. Sarah's team encountered robot defenders that were designed to repel boarders, but the machines had been programmed to fight enemies that followed conventional tactics. Human soldiers moved unpredictably and used weapons in ways the mechanical defenders could not anticipate. The boarding action succeeded in capturing the Devourer ship's central processing unit. For the first time in galactic history, someone had managed to study Devourer technology from the inside. The information they gathered would prove invaluable in future battles, but the immediate victory was even more important. News of the human victory spread throughout Zephyrian space within hours. Species that had been hiding in fear for generations suddenly had proof that the Devourers could be defeated. The mechanical enemies were not invincible, and their tactics could be countered by beings who thought differently than everyone else in the galaxy. Captain Veltar sent a message to Captain Torres as the human ship prepared to leave Ethros space. The Zephyrian commander thanked the humans for honoring the debt of kindness that had begun with saving one human life. He also asked if Earth would be willing to help other species that were under attack by the Devourers. Jake Morrison translated the message for Captain Torres and added his own recommendation. The victory at Ethros had proven that humans could fight the Devourers effectively, but one ship would not be enough to protect the entire galaxy. Earth needed to build more ships and find allies among the other species of the Confederation. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks and gave the crew time to analyze everything. They had learned about fighting the Devourers. Captain Torres filed detailed reports about enemy tactics and weaknesses. Sarah Blake documented the effectiveness of human weapons and boarding techniques. Most importantly, Jake Morrison began planning how to convince other alien species to join a united front against their common enemy. The UES Defiance returned to Earth as heroes, but also as harbingers of a much larger conflict to come. They had proven that the Devourers could be beaten, but they had also learned that the mechanical enemy was vast beyond imagination. Humanity would need allies if they hoped to save the galaxy from the machines that had terrorized it for millennia. Jake Morrison found himself in a role he had never expected when he became humanity's first galactic ambassador, 6 months after the victory at Ethros. The news of human success against the Devourers had spread throughout the Confederation, faster than anyone thought possible. Species that had been hiding in fear for centuries were suddenly sending messages to Earth asking for help and offering alliance. The Grand Council chamber on the neutral world of Harmony Station had not seen so many different species in one place for over 1,000 years. Representatives from 47 different civilizations gathered to discuss something that had seemed impossible just 1 year earlier. They were planning to fight back against the Devourers in a coordinated campaign that could either save the galaxy or destroy what remained of galactic civilization. Jake stood before the assembled delegates and tried to hide his nervousness. Speaking to human leaders had been difficult enough, but now he was addressing beings whose biology and psychology were completely alien to him. Some breathed methane instead of oxygen, while others communicated through color changes in their skin. The translation devices worked reasonably well, but cultural misunderstandings were constant. The Christine delegate was the first to speak after Jake finished his opening remarks. These beings were made of living crystal that could manipulate energy in ways no other species understood. They had been offering their technology to the Confederation for centuries, but no one had ever found practical military applications for their abilities. Human engineers were different and had immediately seen possibilities that others had missed. Dr. Kevin Walsh had spent 3 months working with Christine scientists to develop new weapons that combined human tactical thinking with alien energy manipulation. The results exceeded everyone's expectations and created weapons that could punch through Devourer armor like it was paper. But the Christine were pacifist by nature and needed human leadership to use their gifts effectively in combat. The Merhai delegation represented the galaxy's most advanced biotechnology. These aquatic beings had never been interested in warfare, but their medical and genetic engineering capabilities were beyond anything humans had imagined. They could grow living ships that healed themselves and adapted to battlefield conditions in real time. Combined with human tactical doctrine, these organic vessels became incredibly effective weapons platforms. General Marcus Chen had been working with Merhai engineers to develop new types of warships that could change their configuration during battle. The living hulls could seal breaches automatically, and even regrow destroyed sections if given enough time. More importantly, they could be programmed with human tactical knowledge and would fight with the unpredictability that made human forces so effective against mechanical enemies. The Hive clan sent a delegation that spoke as one voice. Through their collective consciousness, these insect-like beings had organizational capabilities that impressed even human military leaders. They could coordinate millions of individual units across vast distances and execute complex battle plans with perfect precision. But they had always lacked the individual initiative that humans took for granted. Captain Rachel Morgan had been assigned to command the first mixed species task force, and she found working with the Hive clans both fascinating and frustrating. Their ability to coordinate large-scale operations was incredible, but they struggled with the rapid tactical changes that human doctrine required. The solution was to combine Hive clan strategic coordination with human tactical flexibility at the unit level. The negotiations went on for weeks as each species explained what they could contribute. to the Alliance and what they needed in return. Some delegates were concerned about sharing their most advanced technologies with species they barely knew. Others worried that human tactical doctrines were too aggressive and would lead to unnecessary casualties. Jake spent his days mediating between delegates who often had completely different ways of thinking about warfare and cooperation. The ethereals existed partially outside normal space-time and thought in terms of probability clouds rather than linear causality. The Forge Masters were silicon-based, beings who worked on timescales measured in centuries and found human impatience difficult to understand. A breakthrough came when Jake suggested that they start with a small joint operation rather than trying to plan a galaxy-wide campaign. The Devourer staging ground at Kepler Station had been threatening 3 different sectors for decades. It was well defended but small enough that a joint force could attack it without committing the entire Alliance to. Battle Admiral Lisa Parker arrived at Harmony Station with detailed plans for the Kepler Station operation. She had worked with representatives from 12 different species to develop a battle plan that used each civilization's unique strengths. The Christine would provide shields that could protect the fleet during approach. The Merhai would contribute fast attack ships that could adapt to enemy countermeasures. The Hive clans would coordinate the overall battle, while human commanders led individual tactical units. The debate over command structure nearly broke up the Alliance before it could begin. Many species had never served under alien leadership, and some cultures considered it a form of slavery to take orders from outsiders. Jake proposed a compromise where each species would retain command of their own forces but would coordinate through human tactical officers who had proven their effectiveness against the Devourers. Captain Morgan found herself commanding a fleet unlike anything that had ever existed. Her flagship was a hybrid design that combined human engineering with technologies from 6 different species. The crew included beings who breathed different atmospheres and had completely different physiological requirements. The cultural exchange was as revolutionary as the military cooperation. The first joint training exercises were disasters. Species that had never worked together struggled to coordinate even simple maneuvers. Communication problems led to near collisions, and the ethereals kept appearing in the wrong phase of reality. But human adaptability proved as valuable in training as it was in combat, and gradually the mixed crews learned to work together. The attack on Kepler Station launched 3 months after the formation of the Grand Alliance. The combined fleet included over 800 ships from 30 different species, all coordinated through human tactical doctrine. The Devourer defenders had never faced anything like the coordinated assault that hit them from multiple directions. Simultaneously, the battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Devourer base. More importantly, it proved that the Grand Alliance could work in practice as well as in theory. Species that had been hiding in fear for generations had struck a major blow against their ancient enemy and opened up 3 entire sectors for liberation. The victory celebration at Harmony Station brought together beings who had never trusted each other enough to meet in the same room. Jake watched as Christine delegates shared energy patterns with Hive clan representatives, while Merhai engineers compared biological designs with human technical specifications. The Alliance was becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. News of the Kepler Station victory spread throughout the galaxy within days. Worlds that had been isolated for centuries began sending requests to join the Grand Alliance. The Confederation was being reborn as something stronger and more unified than it had ever been before. But Jake knew that the real test was still ahead of them. The Devourers had been caught off guard by the new tactics and technologies of the Grand Alliance, but they were already adapting. Intelligence reports indicated that the mechanical enemy was developing countermeasures and building new types of ships designed to fight the Allied forces. The next phase of the war would be much harder than anything they had faced so far. Jake looked out at the stars from his quarters on Harmony Station and thought about the chain of events that had started with Captain Veltar's decision to save one human life. That simple act of kindness had grown into the largest military alliance in galactic history. But kindness alone would not be enough to win the war that was coming. The galaxy's freedom would be won through sacrifice and courage on a scale that no one could fully imagine. Admiral Tony Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the largest fleet ever assembled move toward their final destination. Over 10,000 ships from 47 different species filled space around him as far as his instruments could detect. After 2 years of victories across the galaxy, the Grand Alliance was ready to strike at the heart of the Devourer Empire. The artificial planet called Prime Core waited ahead of them like a mechanical nightmare made real. The core was larger than most natural worlds and covered with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. It had been the center of Devourer operations for millennia and contained the master intelligence that controlled their species. Jake Morrison stood beside Admiral Rodriguez and studied the tactical displays that showed defenses beyond anything they had encountered before. The journey to reach this point had cost more than anyone wanted to remember. Hundreds of worlds had been liberated from Devourer control, but thousands of ships had been lost in the fighting. Heroes had fallen in every battle, and entire species had sacrificed themselves to protect others. The memorial walls on Earth now contained millions of names from dozens of different worlds. Commander Helen Davis commanded the advance scout squadron that would make the first approach to the core's outer defenses. Her ships were equipped with the newest stealth technology developed by combining human engineering with ethereal phase-shifting abilities. The scouts would gather intelligence about the core's defensive systems and find weak points for the main assault. The initial reconnaissance confirmed everyone's worst fears. The core was protected by energy shields that could absorb the combined firepower of the entire Alliance fleet. Automated weapon platforms surrounded the artificial planet in layers that extended millions of miles into space. Most disturbing of all were the new types of Devourer ships that seemed designed specifically to counter Alliance tactics. Dr. Kevin Walsh had spent months analyzing intelligence reports about the core, and he briefed the Alliance commanders on what they could expect. The Devourers had learned from their defeats and adapted their technology to fight human unpredictability. The mechanical minds controlling the core's defenses would not be surprised by tactics that had worked in previous battles. The first assault wave launched 6 hours after the fleet arrived in the core system. Captain Rachel Morgan led a mixed force of Alliance ships in a direct attack on the outer defense platforms. The Christine energy shields protected the attacking ships from the initial defensive barrage, but the return fire was more intense than anything they had faced before. The battle for the outer defenses lasted 3 days and cost the Alliance over 2,000 ships. Each defensive platform that was destroyed was replaced by 2 more that emerged from hidden bays inside the core itself. The mechanical planet seemed to have unlimited manufacturing capacity and could replace losses faster than the Alliance could inflict damage. Admiral Rodriguez realized that conventional tactics would not work against an enemy that could replace losses instantly. He ordered a desperate gambit that violated every rule of space warfare. The entire Alliance fleet would accelerate toward the core at maximum speed and attempt to break through the defenses through sheer momentum and firepower concentration. Commander Davis volunteered to lead the breakthrough attempt, even though everyone knew it was essentially a suicide mission. Her modified cruiser would ram the core's outer shield at relativistic speed to create a temporary breach for the main fleet to exploit. The explosion would destroy her ship and everyone aboard, but might give the Alliance the opening they needed. The sacrifice worked, but at a terrible cost. Davis and her crew died in the explosion that opened the core's shields, but their deaths allowed thousands of other ships to penetrate the defensive perimeter. The Alliance fleet found itself fighting inside the core's shield envelope, where the battle became a chaotic melee between organic and mechanical forces. Colonel Peter Hayes led the ground assault that followed the fleet breakthrough. His mixed-species Marines had to fight their way through mechanical corridors filled with automated defenses and robotic guards. The core's interior was a 3-dimensional maze of machinery and weapons that seemed designed to confuse and kill intruders. The fighting inside the core was unlike anything in the recorded history of galactic warfare. Alliance forces had to advance through passages barely wide enough for single individuals, while mechanical defenders attacked from every direction. Human urban warfare tactics proved invaluable, but the casualties were enormous as entire squads were wiped out by hidden weapons. Jake Morrison found himself in the core's central chamber after hours of fighting through mechanical tunnels. What he discovered there changed everything he thought he knew about the Devourers. The mechanical beings were not evil conquerors, but prisoners of their own technology. They had once been a biological species like any other, but had become trapped in mechanical bodies that would not let them die. The truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The Devourers consumed planets not because they wanted to destroy life, but because their mechanical bodies required constant resources to survive. They could not shut down their systems or choose death even when they wanted to end their existence. They had been trapped in mechanical hell for millions of years. The core's central computer contained the shutdown protocols that could free the Devourers from their mechanical prison. But activating the system would destroy every Devourer ship and station in the galaxy instantly. It would also kill billions of mechanical beings who might still have some form of consciousness inside their metal shells. Jake stood before the control console with the weight of an impossible decision on his shoulders. He could end the war instantly by activating the shutdown sequence, but only by committing genocide against a species that had never chosen to become what they were. The scars from dozens of battles covered his body, but the choice he faced now was harder than any physical wound. Admiral Rodriguez contacted Jake through the communication system and told him that the Alliance fleet was taking heavy casualties. They could not hold their position inside the core's defenses much longer and would have to retreat soon. The decision about the shutdown sequence had to be made within minutes or the opportunity would be lost forever. Jake thought about Captain Veltar's decision to save one human life when he could have simply ignored the escape pod. The Zephyrian commander had chosen compassion over caution and started a chain of events that led to this moment. The same compassion that had saved Jake's life now demanded that he try to save the Devourers as well. The compromise solution came to Jake in a flash of inspiration. Instead of using the shutdown sequence to kill all the Devourers, he could modify the system to give them a choice. The mechanical beings would be free to shut down their own systems, individually if they chose death or continue existing if they preferred mechanical life to no life at all. The modified shutdown sequence activated across the galaxy and gave every Devourer the choice they had been denied for millions of years. Some chose to end their mechanical existence while others decided to continue living as machines. Most importantly, they were no longer compelled to consume planets and could make their own decisions about how to exist. The war ended not with a great battle but with a simple choice offered to beings who had been denied free will for eons. The Devourers who chose to continue existing became productive members of galactic society while those who chose death found the peace they had been seeking for millennia. The memorial on Earth that commemorated the war bore a simple inscription that Jake had written himself. They saved one human. Humanity returned to save everyone. May we prove worthy of both sacrifices. The words captured the truth that kindness creates obligations and that freedom always comes with a price. Jake Morrison lived to see the first generation of galactic citizens grow up in a universe where cooperation had replaced fear. Children of dozens of different species played together on worlds that had once cowered in terror. The lessons learned during humanity's darkest hour had given birth to civilization's brightest age, but the responsibility of maintaining that peace would last forever.